What if the thing you wished for most, the thing you believed would solve everything, was actually the reason your world collapsed? What if winning the lottery didn't save you, but slowly, methodically destroyed you from the inside out? We all fantasize about hitting the jackpot. We picture a life where money erases every worry, where work becomes optional and luxury becomes normal. Enough cash, we think, and life turns effortless. We imagine paying off debts, buying that dream house, traveling the world without a second thought about the price tag. But history tells a far more unsettling story. Sudden, unearned wealth is rarely a gift. It behaves more like a disease, a slow-acting poison that corrupts judgment, destroys work ethic, and replaces ambition with dependency. And no civilization learned this lesson more brutally, more completely, than the Spanish Empire. In the 16th century, Spain didn't just win the lottery, they discovered the vault. They stumbled upon the greatest supply of precious metals the world had ever known, a geological miracle that seemed too good to be true. Overnight, they rose to become the most powerful empire on Earth, the first realm where the sun never set. They commanded the strongest armies, fielded the largest fleets, and believed with absolute certainty that they ruled by divine right. God himself, they thought, had chosen Spain to dominate the world. And then, unbelievably, impossibly, they watched everything unravel. Within a century and a half, Spain transformed from global superpower to cautionary tale, from empire to economic basket case. They learned one of the most painful truths in economics: gold itself is not wealth. Gold is intoxicating. Gold is seductive. And Spain was about to take a fatal, civilization-ending dose. The discovery that changed everything. To understand how this catastrophe began, we have to travel high into the Andes Mountains of present-day Bolivia. The year is 1545. The place is Potosí, a desolate, windswept plateau where the air is so thin that even breathing becomes labor. At this point in history, Spain was formidable, certainly, but not yet unstoppable. It was a nation shaped by centuries of grinding warfare during the Reconquista, the 700-year campaign to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula from Muslim rule. Deeply religious, culturally militaristic, and forged in the crucible of constant conflict, Spaniards admired warriors far more than accountants. Ledgers mattered less than swords. Glory outranked profit. That entire worldview changed because of a single accident. According to legend, a local indigenous man named Diego Gualpa was chasing a runaway llama up the slopes of a mountain when he slipped on loose rock. As he grabbed desperately at a bush to steady himself, the roots tore loose from the earth and revealed veins of pure silver glittering in the exposed soil like frozen lightning. He had discovered Cerro Rico, the rich hill. And this mountain wasn't merely a productive mine. It was a geological anomaly, a freak of nature, a mountain that seemed almost solid silver. When Spanish conquistadors arrived and confirmed the discovery, they were absolutely stunned. This was the El Dorado of legend made real. They moved instantly, with the ruthless efficiency that had already conquered the Aztecs and Incas. Potosí exploded from a barren, uninhabited plateau into one of the largest cities on Earth. Within just a few decades, it rivaled, and at times even surpassed, London and Paris in population, reaching an astonishing 200,000 inhabitants by 1600. It became a city defined by wild excess, grinding brutality, and obscene wealth, all perched impossibly at 13,000 feet above sea level, where the thin air made simple walking exhausting and any physical labor potentially deadly. The city that sprang up around Cerro Rico was unlike anything the world had seen. 40 churches were built to save the souls of those accumulating unimaginable fortunes. Theaters staged elaborate performances. Gambling houses operated around the clock. Silk, imported from China, was so common that even horses wore silk caparisons. One apocryphal story claims that when the Spanish viceroy visited, locals paved his path with silver bars because they had so much they didn't know what else to do with it. Another tale describes a celebration where the wealthy citizens of Potosi bet entire fortunes on cockfights and card games, losing in a single night what would take ordinary Europeans lifetimes to earn. But silver doesn't extract itself. Spain needed labor, massive amounts of it, and this is where the so-called economic miracle turned into a human catastrophe of staggering proportions. The mountain that eats men, the Spanish imposed the Meta system, a forced labor draft twisted from an ancient Incan tradition of communal work. Under Spanish rule, it became something far darker. Indigenous communities throughout Peru and Bolivia were required to send a percentage of their adult males to work in the mines. Tens of thousands of men, some estimates suggest 8 million over the colonial period, were driven into suffocating tunnels barely wide enough to crawl through, working endless shifts in darkness so complete it felt solid, without sunlight for weeks at a time, hauling impossibly heavy loads of ore up unstable wooden ladders that stretched hundreds of feet. The mortality rate was catastrophic. Men died from cave-ins, from falling, from exhaustion, from silicosis, a lung disease caused by breathing rock dust that turned their lungs to stone. Others simply vanished into collapsed tunnels, their bodies never recovered. People said that if you squeezed Spain's silver coins hard enough, blood would drip out. Locals called Cerro Rico El Cerro que come hombres, the mountain that eats men, and it had an insatiable appetite. Modern historians estimate that the population of indigenous people in the mining regions dropped by as much as 90% during the colonial period. Entire communities were destroyed. Cultural traditions vanished. Languages died out. The silver that built Spanish cathedrals and funded European wars was extracted at a human cost almost impossible to comprehend. But mining the ore was only the beginning. The silver at Potosi was low-grade, mixed with other minerals, requiring sophisticated processing to extract. So Spain adopted a revolutionary but deadly new process: mercury amalgamation. Crushed rock was mixed with toxic mercury, then trampled barefoot by laborers for hours. The mercury bonded with the silver, which could then be separated through heating, a process that released toxic mercury vapor into the air. It was an industrial breakthrough that multiplied extraction efficiency, and it was also a death sentence. Workers developed mercury poisoning, suffering tremors, madness, kidney failure, and agonizing deaths. The mercury contaminated water supplies, poisoned fish, and spread through the ecosystem. Even today, nearly 5 centuries later, elevated mercury levels can still be detected in the region. But this innovation unleashed an economic shockwave that reverberated across the entire planet. Spain could now extract silver on a scale never seen before in human history. Between 1550 and 1800, Mexico and Peru produced roughly 80% of the world's silver, approximately 150,000 tons, with most of it flowing straight to Spain. It was minted into the legendary piece of 8, Real de Ocho, the first true global currency, accepted everywhere from the markets of Manila to the trading posts of Amsterdam, from the Silk Road merchants to African kingdoms. The treasure fleets, rolling the dice with an empire twice a year, like clockwork, massive treasure fleets gathered in Havana. These weren't ordinary merchant convoys. They were floating fortresses, heavily armed armadas designed to transport wealth equivalent to billions of dollars in today's money. Dozens of galleons, each carrying tons of silver, gold, emeralds, pearls, and exotic goods, waited together for safety in numbers. Their hulls sat dangerously low in the water, weighted down with treasure that represented Spain's entire economic lifeline. The crossing was perilous. Pirates prowled the Caribbean. English privateers like Sir Francis Drake became legendary hunting Spanish treasure ships. Hurricanes could scatter entire fleets, sending fortunes to the bottom of the ocean in minutes. In 1622, the Nuestra Señora de Atacha sank in a hurricane off Florida with 40 tons of silver and gold aboard, a loss that shook the Spanish economy. In 1628, Dutch Admiral Piet Hein accomplished what every pirate dreamed of. He captured an entire Spanish treasure fleet off Cuba, seizing 177,000 pounds of silver and thousands of pounds of gold. The haul was so enormous it financed the Dutch West India Company's operations for years and funded Dutch military campaigns against Spain. When the treasure fleets finally appeared off Spain's coast, church bells rang in cities across the country. The king could finally relax, at least momentarily. The bankers smiled and recalculated their ledgers. The spending could continue, at least until the silver ran out again, which was always sooner than expected. Spain became Europe's undisputed superpower almost overnight. Its tercios, the elite infantry formations that dominated European battlefields for over a century, were considered virtually unbeatable. Massive cathedrals rose across Spain and its colonies, their altars dripping with gold, their ceilings covered in silver leaf. Under Charles V and later his son Philip II, Spain controlled an empire spanning 4 continents. They ruled the Netherlands, much of Italy, parts of France, the Philippines, vast territories across the Americas, and even claimed Portugal and its colonial empire for a period. The Spanish court became the most magnificent in Europe, setting standards for fashion, art, and culture. But beneath the glittering surface, they were making a fatal mistake. They looked at mountains of silver and assumed it meant prosperity. They confused money with wealth, a catastrophic error in economic thinking that would doom the empire. The difference between money and wealth, here's the crucial distinction they failed to understand. Money is just a tool for exchange, a medium that facilitates trade. Wealth, true wealth, is the ability to produce food, tools, ships, clothing, technology, infrastructure. Money represents wealth. It is not wealth itself. You can't eat silver coins. You can't shelter your family under gold bars. You can't defend your borders with treasury receipts. Spain had infinite money pouring in from the Americas, but it was systematically, almost suicidally, abandoning its actual productive capacity. The silver acted like a powerful drug, delivering an immediate euphoric sense of invincibility and unlimited power. But beneath that intoxicating high, the empire's real economy was shutting down, organ by organ, like a body slowly dying while the mind remains blissfully unaware. Farmers left their fields, reasoning that a few coins from the treasure fleet could buy imported grain more easily than months of backbreaking labor could produce it. Craftsmen abandoned their trades. Why spend years mastering leatherwork or metallurgy when Spanish silver could simply purchase better goods from France or Italy? Shipbuilders let their skills atrophy because buying foreign vessels seemed easier. Even Spain's once formidable textile industry collapsed as cheaper, better-made cloth flooded in from the Netherlands and England. The work ethic that had sustained Spain through centuries of struggle evaporated. Why work when ships full of silver were always supposedly on the way? The price revolution. When money loses meaning, picture Seville in 1550. It's become the busiest, richest port on earth, the chokepoint through which all New World silver must flow. Treasure ships arrive, and suddenly everyone has money. Nobles, soldiers, sailors, dock workers, merchants, everyone. They're all eager to spend after months at sea or waiting for the fleet's arrival. If you're a shoemaker in Seville, demand for your products explodes overnight. Every sailor wants new boots. Every merchant needs decent shoes. Every nobleman wants the finest footwear. Supply hasn't changed, you can still only make so many shoes, but suddenly everyone has silver coins to throw at you. So naturally, you raise prices. Why sell shoes for 2 reals when customers will gladly pay 4? Then every other business does exactly the same thing. Bakers double the price of bread. Landlords triple rents. Weavers quadruple cloth prices. Everyone raises prices together, creating a self-reinforcing spiral. This phenomenon became known as the price revolution, the first major inflation crisis in modern European history, and Spanish economists of the time struggled to understand what was happening. Silver flooded Spain, but actual goods did not. For centuries, prices across Europe had been remarkably stable. A day's wage bought roughly the same amount of bread in 1,450 as it had in 1,350. But now Spanish prices quadrupled over just a few decades. Inflation reached a staggering 400%. Wages couldn't keep pace. They never do during rapid inflation. Peasants found themselves dramatically poorer than their ancestors despite living in the richest empire on earth. Hunger returned to Spanish villages, not because food was genuinely scarce, but because money had lost its meaning. A Spanish scholar named Martin de Azpilcueta was one of the first to identify what was happening, writing in 1556 that money is worth more where, and when it is scarce than where, and when it is abundant. He had essentially discovered the quantity theory of money, the principle that when the money supply increases faster than the production of goods, each unit of currency becomes worth less. It was an economic revelation, but one that Spain's rulers completely failed to act upon. The collapse of Spanish industry inflation destroyed Spanish industry as comprehensively as any military defeat could have. The mathematics were brutal and inexorable. A Spanish shoemaker, paying inflated prices for leather, tools, and rent, needed to charge 10 silver coins to sell a pair of shoes and barely break even. Meanwhile, a French or English shoemaker, operating in a lower-cost environment, could profitably sell equivalent shoes for just 2 or 3 coins. Spanish goods became completely uncompetitive. Merchants throughout Europe began actively avoiding Spanish products. Why buy expensive Spanish wool when you could get the same quality from England for half the price? Why purchase Spanish weapons when German or Italian craftsmen produced superior goods more cheaply? So Spaniards began importing everything: wheat from the Baltic, textiles from Flanders, weapons from Germany, furniture from Italy, codfish from Newfoundland. Even basic household goods came from abroad. Silver poured into Seville with the treasure fleets, and then immediately poured straight back out to pay foreign merchants. Spain did all the mining, all the killing, all the dangerous sailing, and all the expensive fighting, only to hand the actual wealth to its commercial rivals. People across Europe joked that Spain was the mouth that chews for all of Europe. It consumed everything but digested nothing. Or, as one French observer mockingly noted, everything in Spain is expensive, except silver. Another popular saying claimed that Spanish silver was like rain falling on a roof. It never stayed, just flowed immediately to the gutters and drains, the foreign merchants waiting below. By 1600, Spain was running the largest trade deficit in the world. One estimate suggests that roughly 75% of the silver arriving from the Americas passed through Spain within a year, ending up in France, Italy, the Netherlands, England, and eventually China, which was absorbing enormous quantities of silver to feed its monetizing economy. The culture of idleness, this economic reality, fundamentally reshaped Spanish culture in ways that persisted for centuries. While merchants thrived and gained social respect in England and the Netherlands, Spain increasingly glorified the hidalgo, minor nobles who refused to work with their hands, living off military pensions, small inheritances, and fierce pride. The very word hidalgo comes from hijo de algo, meaning son of something, implying noble descent, however distant or dubious. Commerce became socially dishonorable. A Spanish nobleman would rather starve than engage in trade. Countless stories circulated about impoverished hidalgos who maintained elaborate pretenses of wealth, wearing their one good outfit until it fell apart, skipping meals but insisting on keeping a servant, often as poor as they were, to maintain appearances. The literature of the era reflects this cultural dysfunction brilliantly. The picaresque novel, a distinctly Spanish invention, featured roguish protagonists navigating a society of fraud and pretense. In the anonymous Lazarillo de Tormes, 1554, the young protagonist serves a nobleman so poor he hasn't eaten in days, yet who spends hours arranging his cape and sword to look prosperous when leaving his empty house. Cervantes' Don Quixote, 1605 features a delusional nobleman clinging to fantasies of chivalric glory while the real world moves on without him, arguably a metaphor for Spain itself. Spanish ambition shifted dramatically from innovation and production to bureaucracy and rent-seeking. The most talented young men didn't dream of building businesses or mastering crafts. They competed for positions in the colonial administration, the military, or the church. Government posts in the Americas, where one could skim from the silver flowing past, became the ultimate prize. These positions were bought and sold openly. The entire system became extractive rather than productive. Spain became hollow. It glittered magnificently on the surface, grand palaces, elaborate ceremonies, impressive fleets, but decayed from within. Innovation vanished. Industrial production stalled. Agricultural output declined. Everything depended on the next treasure fleet arriving safely, and that dependence was desperately dangerous. The debt trap. Spending tomorrow's silver today. Philip II, who ruled the most extensive empire the world had yet seen, spent money with breathtaking abandon. Wars against France, against the Ottoman Empire, against the rebellious Dutch provinces, against Protestant England. Each campaign drained the treasury faster than the treasure fleets could refill it. Maintaining the empire's military and administrative apparatus consumed staggering sums. The royal court's elaborate ceremonies and propaganda also cost a fortune. To fund these commitments, Philip borrowed heavily through asientos, high-interest loans from European banking families, particularly the Fuggers of Germany and the Genoese bankers who essentially became Spain's financial masters. These were complex financial instruments, but the basic concept was simple. Philip promised to repay loans with silver that hadn't even been mined yet. He was spending tomorrow's treasure fleets to fund today's wars. The interest rates were punishing, sometimes exceeding 40% annually. The bankers understood the risks perfectly and priced them accordingly. But Philip had no choice. His empire's survival depended on continuous military spending, and the silver, everyone believed, would keep flowing forever. The Spanish Armada of 1588 was the ultimate expression of this borrow-and-spend strategy. Philip assembled the largest invasion fleet ever attempted, 130 ships carrying 30,000 men, to conquer Protestant England and reclaim it for Catholicism. The expedition cost approximately 10 million ducats, equivalent to several years' worth of American silver. When it failed catastrophically, destroyed by English tactics, Dutch support, and terrible weather, the debt remained. Those loans still needed to be repaid, with crushing interest. By the 1570s, Spain's interest payments exceeded all government revenue. Think about that for a moment. Every single silver coin arriving from America went immediately to foreign bankers just to service existing debt, before paying for anything else. Spain was running faster and faster just to stay in place, and so Spain defaulted, again and again. Philip II declared bankruptcy in 1557, 1560, 1575, and 1596. His son Philip III added defaults in 1607 and 1627. Philip IV contributed more in 1647 and 1656. Each default renegotiated existing debts, converting short-term loans into long-term bonds at slightly lower interest rates, buying a few more years of breathing room. But each default also damaged Spain's credibility, making future loans more expensive and harder to obtain. The empire became trapped in a doom loop, a machine designed simply to move silver directly from American mines into the vaults of foreign banks, with Spain acting merely as the middleman in the plundering of its own empire. The final humiliation, copper money eventually, as silver production began declining and the debt trap tightened, Spain resorted to the oldest, most desperate trick in the government playbook, debasing the currency. Unable to pay its bills with real silver, the government began flooding the economy with vellon, copper coins with a tiny silver content that the government declared to be worth far more than their actual metal value. It started gradually, a little less silver in each coin, the difference barely noticeable, but it accelerated rapidly. By the 1620s, Spain was issuing pure copper coins and simply declaring them equivalent to silver. The government could mint copper coins for a fraction of their declared face value, creating money out of thin air and spending it as though it were real. The result was predictable and catastrophic: hyperinflation. Prices exploded. A commodity that cost 100 copper coins in 1600 cost 500 by 1650. The economy descended into chaos. People hoarded any real silver they could find. Merchants demanded payment in actual silver or foreign currency, refusing the worthless copper tokens. International trade became nearly impossible. No foreign merchant would accept Spanish copper coins. Society fractured along class lines. The wealthy who possessed land, real silver, and foreign assets survived reasonably well. The middle-class artisans, small merchants, skilled workers was completely wiped out. The poor starved. Social mobility ceased to exist. Spain became a society of extreme inequality, frozen between a wealthy elite and a desperately poor majority, with almost nothing in between. The empire dies by the mid-1600s. Spain was essentially finished as a great power. The silver production at Potosí peaked around 1600 and then began an irreversible decline. Richer deposits had been exhausted. Flooding made deeper mining difficult. The indigenous labor force had been decimated. Alternative silver sources in Mexico partially compensated, but the glory days were over. And because Spain had spent centuries buying instead of building, importing instead of manufacturing, borrowing instead of investing, it had nothing left when the silver finally ran out. No industrial base to fall back on, no commercial networks, no technological innovation, no work ethic, just debt, inflation, and faded memories of greatness. Meanwhile, the nations that Spain had considered beneath it, England and the Netherlands especially, used Spanish silver to create the foundations of modern capitalism. They invested in infrastructure, protected property rights, developed financial innovations like stock markets and insurance, encouraged trade and manufacturing. Dutch and English merchants built commercial empires that eventually eclipsed Spain's territorial one. The Industrial Revolution began in Britain, not Spain. The irony is almost unbearable. Spain's treasure financed the rise of its rivals. Spanish silver paid for Dutch independence. It funded English exploration and colonization. It built the merchant fleets that eventually dominated global trade. Spain provided the capital for its own obsolescence. The warning that echoes through time. Spain's story is the ultimate economic warning, as relevant today as it was 4 centuries ago. Easy money, whether silver, oil, lottery winnings, or any sudden windfall, breaks the fundamental bond between effort and reward that makes societies function. It corrodes the work ethic, destroys productive capacity, creates entitlement, and breeds corruption. Economists now call this phenomenon the resource curse, or Dutch disease. Countries with massive natural resource wealth, oil-rich Middle Eastern nations, diamond-rich African countries, Venezuela with its enormous petroleum reserves, often perform worse economically than countries with fewer natural advantages. The windfall wealth tends to strengthen the currency, making other exports uncompetitive. It creates incentives for political corruption and rent-seeking rather than productive enterprise. It generates complacency and a sense that wealth will continue automatically without effort. The pattern repeats itself with tragic regularity throughout history. Spain drowned in silver. Venezuela, once Latin America's richest country, collapsed despite having the world's largest oil reserves. Nauru, a Pacific island nation, squandered enormous wealth from phosphate mining and is now virtually bankrupt. Countless individual lottery winners end up more miserable and financially distressed than before their windfall. The lesson is profound. Wealth is not something you possess, it's something you create. It's not money, it's productive capacity. It's not treasure in a vault. It's knowledge, skills, infrastructure, institutions, and work ethic. Gold itself is just a metal. What matters is what you do with it. Spain looked at mountains of silver and saw unlimited power. They should have seen a test they were destined to fail. They became addicted to unearned wealth, and like all addicts, they destroyed themselves pursuing the next fix. Spain drowned in gold, and in the end became enslaved by it. Thank you for watching. If you want to understand how economies rise and fall, how wealth is created and destroyed, and what history's greatest cautionary tales teach us about our own time, make sure to subscribe. These patterns repeat, and understanding them might be the most valuable knowledge you can possess. We'll see you in the next one.